Hi everyone, was King Midas a real person? Well, King Midas is a character from Greek mythology. He was a powerful, wealthy king who was said to have been able to turn anything he touched into gold. So this at first seemed like a blessing, but then it ended up being a curse, obviously, when you stop to think about it for a minute. So that's who King Midas was, but was he real? Well, you might think, based on his story, obviously he's just a fictional character, a mythical figure, but it's not uncommon for real kings to be associated with mythological features or even abilities. So there's really nothing about his story itself which precludes the idea that he was a real person. So when we look into the evidence, what do we find? Is there any evidence that he was real? Well, first of all, we need to establish some facts about him, because obviously we can't find him in the historical record if we don't know what we're looking for. So he was a king called Midas. He ruled over Phrygia, which was a kingdom in Anatolia, a very powerful, rich kingdom in Iron Age Anatolia. And he was the son of a person called Gordius. So that's important. Okay, so he was a king called Midas, son of Gordius, king of Anatolia. And when exactly did he live? That's also important, because obviously if we're not looking in the right place, we won't be able to find him. Well, this is actually fairly easy to establish because of one crucial factor. Like I said, he was a rich and powerful king. And that dovetails nicely with the fact that there's this legend about him turning everything he touched into gold. Obviously, that kind of legend wouldn't develop around a king who wasn't actually rich in real life. And the legends do explicitly present him as being rich. So, we're looking for a rich king, and he ruled over Phrygia in Anatolia. Now that's important because Anatolia didn't become a rich and powerful kingdom, according to archaeology, until the 8th century. So this means that we must be looking for a king of Phrygia named Midas, son of Gordius, no earlier than the 8th century. If we looked earlier than the 8th century, then we'd be looking in the era in which Phrygia wasn't rich and powerful. So obviously that can't be the setting for the legend of Midas, the rich king who turned everything he touched into gold. So that's the upper limit, but what about the lower limit? What's the most recent time period in which he could have lived? Well, the kingdom of Phrygia was defeated and destroyed by the Cimmerians in the 7th century. So obviously King Midas couldn't have been a king more recently than that. So we're looking at somewhere between the start of the 8th century and near the beginning of the 7th century. So basically the 8th century, give or take a little bit. So that's when Midas should have lived, based on the criterion of him being the king of a powerful kingdom, a rich and powerful king ruling over a rich and powerful kingdom, turning everything he touched into gold according to legend. So when we look to that era of Phrygia, can we find Midas? Well, we can. We can find him from two sources. One, Herodotus, and two, Assyrian records. So according to Herodotus, there was a king of Phrygia called Midas, son of Gordius, who gave an expensive gift to the Oracle of Delphi before King Gyges of Lydia. So that is a very important bit of information because that confirms that there was a king of Lydia called Midas, son of Gordius, before the start of the 7th century. And he was said to have gifted this expensive gift to the Oracle of Delphi. That's important because that provides an upper limit, because according to archaeology, there is no evidence for the presence of the Oracle of Delphi or the Temple of Apollo, where she was said to have been active, before the 9th century BCE. So this confirms that there was, within that time period, after the 9th century BC, but before the start of the 7th century, there was a king called Midas, son of Gordius, which is exactly what we would expect, based on the logic surrounding the whole point about the setting of the story clearly being based in the era in which Phrygia was a powerful kingdom, which was not before the 9th century, but also not after the 7th century. However, admittedly, that evidence from Herodotus isn't very specific, but when we look to Assyrian records, we do find some specific information. So Assyrian records reveal that in the time of Sargon II, there was a king of the Mushki people called Mita. That's how they recorded him, Mita. Now the Greeks had a tendency to put an S on the end of names, depending on the exact rules involved. So the correspondence between Mita of Assyrian records and the Midas of Greek records is very clear and very strong. And the Mushki people were a nation in Anatolia who were closely associated with the Phrygians. So this Assyrian reference to Maita, king of the Mushki people in Anatolia, is a clear match for Midas, king of the Phrygians. And as for when he lived, well, like I said, he appears in records concerning the activities of Sargon II. Sargon II campaigned into Anatolia, so he came into contact with this King Maita. And the references to him make it clear that he was a powerful king, so that matches the stories of Midas. But the point is that these references place him in a chronological context which matches what we would expect from Herodotus and from the general context of Phrygia being a powerful kingdom, and it specifically points to the latter half of the 8th century as the era in which he lived. So everything indicates that the Midas from Greek legend, the Midas son of Gordius, king of the powerful kingdom of Phrygia, is the same as this Maita who appears in Assyrian records as ruling over part of Anatolia in the latter half of the 8th century BCE. So this provides us with clear evidence that Midas from Greek mythology really was a real person. Now, if you'd like to know where was the mysterious island of Brazil from Irish tradition, then come back next time for my next video.